Here's your bracket members: Braden Gleason, Lacey Pickering, Nikita Lear, Hayden Gasser, Landon Stevens, Joey Wolf, Rafael Flores, Caleb Hosier, Logan Smith. Now here's your host, Coach John Sony.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Bracket U, a college basketball bracket podcast brought to you by Delphi Bracketology. This is our 10th year of bracketology, and we just want to bring weekly updates and maybe 2 shows a week going forward to help you guys know where your favorite team stands in regards to the upcoming NCAA tournament in March. This podcast is for all you junkies that have March Madness all season long. I'm the host, Brian Tonsoni, and our students are taking the night off. They'll be back on Thursday, but right now I have a college student who has been really working hard in the bracketology world from Wabash College, Gage Businger. Welcome to the show tonight. Share with our listeners where they can find your work and how you got started in the bracketology world.
Well, you can find my work on Twitter under the handle at CBBT Bracketology. My bracketology kind of career started last season around January. I've always been a college basketball fan ever since I was a kid, played basketball growing up. Always something that intrigued me was sitting down on Selection Sunday and seeing where your team is seated. And from that point, I decided I'd get into the weeds of that and figure out how that's set. And ever since then, it's just been a blast to be a part of, bracketology and the community and everyone around, involved with it. And yeah, it's great.
Well, we really appreciate your work. We follow you on Twitter and see where we agree and disagree. And that's the fun part of this for us is to share people like yourself and other bracketologists, their work, and just discuss, as the committee would, where teams are going to be seated, because you're going to see things a certain way. We at Delphi Bracketology are going to see things another way, and together we can maybe kind of understand where the bracket world is. So, Gage, let's not waste any time. Let's get started right away. And everyone likes to talk about the 1 seeds and the 2 seeds, and we're going to talk about the top 4 seed lines, also known as the protected seed lines. For us, and I think most people right now, you have 3 teams that are safely on the 1 seed line in Purdue, Connecticut, and Houston. The question that has happened for all of us the last few weeks is who gets that last number 1. And that's likely to between Arizona, North Carolina, Kansas, Tennessee, and even Marquette. I think the 8 teams on the top 2 seed lines are going to fight for that last number 1, and the rest are going to fall into the number 2. Where do you see this 1 and 2 seed line right now?
Yeah, so taking the final 1 seed spot, I have Arizona. I think as the season progresses, I think their win on the road against Duke is just going to keep getting better. I think that's a win that's going to carry them a long way, as the Pac-12 maybe doesn't have the opportunities as a conference such as the Big Ten or the Big 12 would have. So Arizona is my last number 1 seed, but a challenger to that would be Kansas. They're my number 5 overall team. They're building a resume that it's going to be strong come March, especially with all the quad 1 opportunities in the Big 12. So Kansas is probably the top contender. But as you mentioned, lurking behind, you have North Carolina, Marquette, Tennessee. These are all very solid teams that, as proven, they can beat anyone, and they can also sometimes lose to anyone. But I think that's what's going to make it interesting down the stretch of who can kind of survive and don't take the bad losses and keep building the resume through quad 1 and 2 wins.
A big game for us tonight after we're finished is Kansas at Texas Tech. Kansas is playing without one of their starters and key reserves due to injury. The committee does take that into consideration, but I also believe Kansas is that 5th team. We see a lot of other bracketologists believe more in Kansas or North Carolina or Tennessee or North Carolina, but I just can't get over the number of quality wins that Kansas has at the top level of quad 1. That, to me, is the deciding factor. I know they struggle on the road, Gage, in the Big 12, but the Big 12 is really, really good. Although there has been a little bit of controversy talk about how they gamed the non-conference when you look at some of the teams like Texas, Texas Tech, TCU, a lot of those things. A lot of those teams have really gained the system and have a real high or bad non-conference strength of schedule. And so there's some question there, but I still think Kansas is there. And you brought up a good point as well, that who has the most opportunities going forward? I think it's going to be Kansas because of the quality of the Big 12, and then maybe Tennessee. I think North Carolina and the Big East is faltering some with teams at the back end of our bracket. So I think it's going to ultimately be between Arizona and Kansas. Talk a little bit about your thoughts on Marquette. I'm a big Shaka Smart fan and love Tyler Kolek at point guard. I think they play basketball the right way. We have them 7th, I believe, or 8th, depending on our meeting tomorrow at the back end. Do you think they have a shot at the number one, leapfrogging a lot of those teams we just mentioned?
I think they do. I think, as of now, what Marquette has avoided is those bad losses. No quad 3 or quad 4 losses. They do have a quad 2 loss, but as we've seen in the past, in a league like the Big East, where they can have opportunities down the stretch. I like Marquette. I think they have athleticism at the guard position. Obviously, Tyler Kolek is a phenomenal player, can just distribute the ball, get assists left and right, score at will sometimes. I think Marquette is definitely a team that has maybe flown under the radar lately, just because they haven't had an eye-popping result lately in terms of a win or a loss. But I think that's a team that, as you mentioned, is just kind of sitting and waiting to pounce as maybe some top teams falter down the stretch.
And always look at who they're playing and the quad 1 opportunities. They have a quad 1 opportunity on the road at Butler, just down the road from you and I. I will be in attendance as a member of media. Very blessed that Butler has given me that opportunity to go watch that game. And then they also play UConn, I think, in the back end of the week on Saturday. So there's a big week if Marquette will go up to the top of the 2 seed line or maybe the 1 seed line. You lose a couple of these games, and I don't know that they automatically drop, because those are really good teams to play. That's the other thing. Sometimes we got to be careful. I do this an awful lot too, that a loss means you got to go in and drop someone only if that resume changes so much that the team below them is better. And that it gets tighter as the season goes on, where one loss may not make that much of difference as it would have in December or January. I'm going to try to add this to this is our spreadsheet that we use. And so now we're going to go talk about teams in the 3 and 4 range. And it gets a little dicey here, Gage, when you get back to the back end of the 4 seed line. But we have Baylor, Alabama, Iowa State, and Auburn on the 3 seed line, followed by Duke, Illinois, Dayton, and South Carolina. And we always go, what do we don't like when we start our meetings? We'll have our meeting at 7:20 tomorrow. Right now, I'm not sure where Auburn fits on that 3 or 4 line. I think could be open for debate. Where you put Dayton could be on the 5. As you've seen, we've dropped Wisconsin down out of these top 4. Your 3 and 4 seeds, and where do you see some agreement with us and maybe some disagreement with us at the moment?
So upon first examination, I do have Auburn as a team on the 4 seed line. I also have Illinois as a 5 seed. I'm looking at Illinois' resume, and yes, their net it's nice. It's 14th is a very good net. But if you look at their wins, on the year, they kind of lack those great wins, in my opinion. They're 3 and 5 in quad 1 games, no quad 1A wins. I would venture to say that their best win would be against Florida Atlantic earlier in the season. That's a team that, come Saturday, if they were not in the top 4 on the top 4 seed line, I would not be shocked. But you have to think with their net that might carry them quite a ways, and their predictive metrics look pretty good as well.
Gage is talking about the committee reveals its top 4 protected seed lines as we're talking here tonight on Saturday afternoon. So we'll get to see where the committee is placing these teams right now, and we tried then to take away from that where the committee is leaning and which criteria is most important to the current committee. That's an important date for our fans, but it's a really important date for our bracketologists. And you brought this up, I think, on Twitter earlier today, and so this is going to be a point of our discussion tomorrow. I thought it was very valid about Illinois. And Florida Atlantic has struggled some too, and as they drop, then your best win is dropping for Illinois. And then always the struggle is, if you do drop Illinois, who do you have on the 4 seed line that we don't have? We have, again, Duke, Illinois, Dayton, and South Carolina. What teams are up on that 4 seed line for you?
Yeah, so on my 4 seed line, I actually have Creighton sneaking up as a top 4 seed. I like Creighton's resume a lot. They, again, similar to Marquette in a sense, have avoided those kind of bad losses. Looking at their resume as of now, they are 8-0 in quad 3 and 4 games combined. They have a winning record against quad 1 and 2 games with a 9-7 record. And they do have a 500 record in quad 1 games at 4-4 and a quad 1A win to their name as well. It'll be interesting to see, as we go down the stretch, how Creighton performs, because I think honestly they've overperformed. I was kind of down on them at the beginning of the year, but I'm looking at Creighton's resume and I'm thinking and you guys have them as the top 5 seed. I think they can sneak into a top 4 seed.
That would be the team I would suggest moving up to the 4 seed line if we were going to make a change with either Illinois, Dayton, or South Carolina. Wisconsin's sitting there too. Probably for us, if you wanted to argue to keep it the way we have it currently with Creighton, is their 3 quad 2 losses compared to the teams up above them. And it's tough for us. Duke, Illinois, and South Carolina all have a quad 3, where Creighton and Wisconsin don't, but they don't have many losses in quad 2 as those teams. And that's, again, where a committee member might say that's important for me, that they are clean in quad 3 and quad 4 losses, or where the other one says, no, they've lost a couple to that second group that Duke and Illinois hasn't. And then you got to dig into the stuff of Florida Atlantic is your top win versus Creighton has better wins. And does that move the committee more than anything else? But I think that 4 and 5 seed line is the toughest one right now of the top 20, obviously the back end there. So there you have it. There's some protected seed conversation. You'll see that again Saturday in the NCAA reveal. You're listening to Bracket U from Delphi Bracketology. Joining us tonight is guest Gage Businger. And now let's talk about how hard it is to seed some teams. We kind of talked about it behind the scenes before the show. There are a few teams that either have a really good predictive metric, the net, or they have a really good resume record, which they have a lot of wins, but they don't have a good mathematical offensive and defensive efficiency. How do you judge those teams, and what teams are we talking about that are really difficult to place inside a 1 through 68 seed list?
Yeah, so 3 teams I had written down heading into this podcast were Florida Atlantic, Texas Tech, and Wake Forest. They all seem to have resumes that are different, but also pretty hard to diagnose. With Florida Atlantic, you have losses to Bryant, FGCU, and Charlotte. Obviously, those aren't teams you would want to lose to if you want a high seed. So that's a team that I could see, if the committee looks at, they beat Arizona on a neutral court. It's like, you could argue that they should be higher than, maybe a committee member who values bad losses compared to good wins. So that's a team that could be a 6 seed, an 8 seed, anywhere in between. So that's interesting. Texas Tech is 3-5 in quad 1 games, and no quad 3, quad 4 losses either, which is good for them. But I think last year it was the highest seeded team to have a losing record in quad 1 and 2 games was Creighton as a 6 seed. So Texas Tech is kind of hovering that area as well right now. And then Wake Forest, no wins in quad 1 games. They're hovering around the bubble. But again, no bad losses. And with how bad the bubble is, compared to the top seeds in our bracket, it'll be interesting to see, is the plethora of quad 2, 3, and 4 wins going to compensate for the lack of quad 1 wins? it's anyone's guess at this point.
So where do you have Florida Atlantic right now? What seed do you have them?
I have Florida Atlantic as a as a 7 seed right now.
Yeah. That's where we have them, and we have them on the 6 or 7 line. I'll check here real quick. I think we have FAU as the last 6, and I think that's probably a little too high, to be honest with you. We have Texas Tech. We have Texas Tech is an 8 seed for us right now, and can be maybe possibly a little bit higher. I'll add into that, a team locally, Butler, which I'll see tomorrow. They have some really nice road wins that you cannot, look past, that help their resume, but their net is 50. I think they're sitting in our 9 seed line. They're a little difficult. I mentioned off the air Michigan State, which has been out of some brackets all the way completely, but boy, they have good metrics, and they have just lost to good teams. They have no losses outside of quad 3 and 4. They're 5-9 in the first 2 quads, only 1-5 on the road, but they have the 15th toughest schedule, the 38th toughest non-conference schedule, and their offense and defensive efficiencies are fantastic. And so where do you put those teams? And then your Wake Forest, they're trailing by 4 right now to Duke. There's several teams on the bubble, if you talk about Gonzaga and Cincinnati and Ole Miss and Colorado, that have real difficult metrics or resume. And where do you put them? And that's what we try to do. But you brought up some very good ones. Let's talk Indiana State Sycamores, a local team here that is just playing outstanding basketball, is in a 1-bid league. Usually the Missouri Valley will get its championship, and so Indiana State will have to win several games in a row in traditional years to get to the tournament. But sometimes the 1-bid leads have good enough regular season results where if they lose, the top team in that league loses, they could get an at-large. Your thoughts on Indiana State Sycamores? Should they get an at-large as of right now, and what do they have to do to maintain that possible at-large berth?
I think as of now, if the tournament was to start today, there would be no question that you would have to include the Sycamores. They, in referring to teams who don't have a quad 1 win, Indiana State does on the road against Bradley. They scored that as a quad 1 game. And then outside of quad 1 games, 20-0 and across quads 2, 3, and 4 games. They have 10 wins on the road or neutral sites, and they also have a great net ranking as in the top 20. I believe they're 20th in the net right now. So you look at that. They've taken care of business. They've lost to, I believe, Alabama, Michigan State, and Drake. It would be their only 3 losses so far in the season. And that signals to me a tournament team, an at-large team, maybe even a single-digit seed at this point.
Yeah, are they at 8 and 9? Or are they going to fall back into that 10-11? They have, I believe, 2 quad 2 road games left where it falls into the top 75. You get both of those, and I think Indiana State will be an at-large regardless. I like to say lose 1 game, only lose 1, and something can happen, and then get to your conference final, play on that Sunday on CBS, and I think you'll see the Indiana State Sycamores, a local team here that is just fun to watch. Their offense is incredible, ball movement. They definitely passed the eye test, which isn't an official criteria. But if you're on that committee and you're talking about Indiana State, there's one other mid-major, Grand Canyon, who I don't know as much about, that we're keeping our eye on as well for a possible at-large from a 1-bid league if they get knocked off in their tournament. So let's hope for that. I want to talk Gonzaga for a little bit. Gonzaga's been in every tournament since I've probably been alive, for 57 years, it seems like. They've played okay basketball. They haven't gotten wins, and they finally go on the road against Kentucky, a team that's struggling, but still nonetheless a top 6 seed, top 7 seed at worst. On the road, not only do they get a quad 1 win, but they get a quality road victory, but they don't have a lot of opportunities, Gage, and they're sitting there in the high 20s in the net, which is really good. Do they have enough on their resume to get in a bracket, in your opinion, now and going forward?
It's going to be a heated conversation, I'm sure. Even today, I think as of now, I have them as my last team in. I think going on the road to Rupp Arena and defeating Kentucky is something that, a few teams have done this season, but it's never an easy task. And I believe Gonzaga doing that, might give the impression to the committee that, they're a team that's, here's their ceiling, here's what they can do. They have played it. They always play a tough non-conference schedule because they know in the West Coast Conference it doesn't really provide much in terms of outside of St. Mary's and occasionally Santa Clara, a great win, but this year kind of came back and bit them because they didn't score any good wins. They lost to Purdue, lost to UConn, lost to Washington, San Diego State. All teams that are, pretty solid. Of course, most of the teams are very good, but this year they just couldn't overcome that. They lose to Santa Clara in conference play. They lose to St. Mary's in conference play. And then it's kind of like, well, what's the substance to, justify them being in the bracket? But just a huge win this weekend over Kentucky. I think that's really a season saving win, assuming they don't win the WCC.
You talked earlier, referencing trends. The trends are if you're in the 20s in the net, you're going to get in. But that's usually been coupled with a few more quad 1 and a few more quad 2 wins along with a high net. We're seeing teams in the 20s right now or around the 20s. Colorado was around there for a while. Not Ole Miss. Who's the other team? Florida, Cincinnati was for a while. Now Florida's moved up. Virginia's moved up to the low 30s. Those teams I think are more deserving, but we have Cincinnati on the bubble, which we'll talk here a little bit. Is this the year the trend continues, or is it a trend until the trend just ends, right? Is there going to be a team in the 20s left out because they just didn't get enough wins? And you would think that Gonzaga is going to be that debate. And what do you do with them? I think they play St. Mary's one more time. If they get that win, I think you're going to see a team with a low quad 1 wins get in. Last year, I believe there was a team that got in as the first 11 seed. I'm going to go check here real quick. It was North Carolina State was 1-6 in quad 1, 7-4 in quad 2, and got in as the top 11 seed. They didn't even have to go to a play-in game. The problem is Gonzaga doesn't even have a lot of quad 2s. Mm-hmm. So your guess going forward, do you think they're going to get in 3 or 4 weeks or not?
I think if they win out and lose in the WCC championship game, I think they get in. If they do not defeat St. Mary's and lose in the WCC tournament, I think they're out.
That will be interesting to see. It'll be awful tough for me not to put Gonzaga in just out of respect for their program. So those are a couple teams that we're looking for that have some odd situations, Indiana State and Gonzaga, teams to watch going forward. But let's talk about bubble. And bubble means those teams that are on the verge of either being in or being out, and a good week or a bad week can make the fortunes for the fans of those teams rise or fall. Let's talk about your teams on the bubble, your last 4 teams in the tournament and your first 4 teams out.
So in my last 4 in, I've kind of touched up on it this morning, but I have Nebraska, Wake Forest, Cincinnati, and Gonzaga. And then in the first 4 out category, Ole Miss, Seton Hall, Memphis, and Providence.
Let me ask you here real quick. How do you do your automatic qualifiers? Because it matters. Depending on the source of information that you use, we pulled a couple teams that are lower in the net. Richmond in the 8-10 over Dayton is our automatic qualifier today because they lead the conference. That's what we use. So there are 2 less at-large bids in our bracket this morning based on the data we use. How do you set your automatic qualifiers?
Right. I usually don't pull teams like Richmond or South Florida. I usually don't do that until we get to the beginning of March. So right now, I have 2 more teams in the field on the bubble than you guys do. So that definitely plays a big factor into the decision-making.
And it's something for our listeners to understand, depending on the criteria for each bracketologist. My first 2 teams out would probably be in a bracket if Gage was looking at the same thing. Where we agree and disagree, I have New Mexico, Washington State, Nebraska, and Nevada as our last 4 in. And then we have teams on the outside, Wake Forest, Cincinnati, Ole Miss, and Seton Hall, those 4. So, again, if the top teams – if Dayton wins the conference tournament and replaces Richmond. And I forget the other league right now, South Florida in the American, right? Is that right, in the American Conference?
Yep.
Are they?
Yep.
Yeah. If they don't win, they don't steal a bid. So you're going to see a couple more teams in. Interesting on the Wake Forest, which you mentioned earlier, with the no quad one wins. Talk about why you like Cincinnati.
Yeah, I'm liking Cincinnati just because, as you've mentioned, and broadly kind of understood and agreed on, is the Big 12 is it's a difficult conference. I mean, that's hands down one of the, if not the hardest in the whole college basketball world. I like Cincinnati because, simply they have a pretty good net. They have, some opportunities heading on the stretch that are going to, either improve that net or diminish it. But their predictive metrics look good. They only have one quad 3 loss, 2-6 in quad 1, which is, could be better for sure. But, as we've mentioned before, the opportunities that teams have, I think Cincinnati is in the catbird seat to, pick up big wins. And I think they're capable of it. They played Houston really well this weekend. And, just based off the eye test, I think they're a team that can, but right now I think they're a tournament team just based off the resume. And I think that'll continue as we head down the stretch.
Yeah, I'm watching them very closely. Like I said, they're real close, and depending on the AQ, they probably would be in a bracket, so we totally see where you're coming from. Nebraska was a surprise team for us, Gage, this week. When we reset everything, they won their last game, but they dropped a seed line for us, or two seed lines for us, just in comparison. Last Saturday, teams that were in our bracket at the back end got some really good wins, and therefore really kind of improved their resume, while Nebraska's win wasn't so good. And when you reorder them, we did have Nebraska move down, and then when we have the extra 2 AQs, it really puts them in that last 4. But that's an interesting thing. You have Michigan State, who got a good win. Northwestern should be okay right now in the Big Ten, but you have Nebraska sitting there as that last team. Probably needs another road win or two to get in. And then Providence is an interesting team for us because of the injury to Bryce Hopkins. Mm-hmm. They still have good star quality on there. And if you look at their resume as a whole, I think they're a bubble team with all the results. If you look at it with just after Bryce Hopkins, I think they're 4-6, and they've won, against Georgetown and DePaul, and only had one quality win since the young man got injured. You wonder how the committee's going to look at that, especially if you get to a point where it's down to the last team or two. You had Seton Hall out, correct?
Correct, yep.
Or Providence. You had Providence out as well, right?
Yeah, Providence and Seton Hall out
yeah.
Right now. Mm-hmm.
And, they both have some nets that are somewhat questionable. So those are things on the bubble that you kind of have to look at besides just the quad ones and those things. And everyone will have a difference of opinion. Is there a team out right now for you that you think will make a really strong push to be in the tournament?
Honestly, I think, as we've seen Memphis, they've had woes lately, but I think the last couple of games, I think the second half against who was it? Was it Wichita State? Maybe, I think it was one of those games. They really didn't deserve the win, but they came back and really played a great second half. Ever since then, it's been kind of smooth sailing for the Tigers. I think they have wins that are very solid, and I think that's a team that can maybe even run the table in the American, but if not that, at least get enough wins, the quantity of wins that they have, maybe not the quality of them, but the quantity of them to get them into the tournament.
That's interesting you said that. We just kind of moved Memphis up from way down in our consideration list into maybe the next 4 out. I think they had an injury situation too when they had their lull. They were finding their team without one of their better players. I'm going to have to look into that a little bit more to make sure I know what the impact was. But they do have wins. Their net is not good enough necessarily to just push them in. But they do have the wins, and I do think that's a team that really bears watching. The other team for me is, I think, someone in the Big East, whether it be Villanova, St. John's, Providence. We have those teams down the list of our considered, but they play in a good conference, they string together 2 or 3 big wins against the top, and all of a sudden you're seeing a team with like 18-13, but Villanova's got 6 combined quad 1 and 2 wins. They just have some bad losses. St. John's has been in our bracket until just recently. They've lost a few games in a row at 14-10, but if they turn that around and get to 18-10 in a week or two, they have 7 quad 1 and 2 wins. Providence has those 6. I think you might see a Seton Hall, Villanova, St. John's, Providence work their way back in, depending on how many at-large berths are left. So, Gage, as we wrap up our show, what are some key things for you, either teams, conferences? Obviously, Saturday's reveal is something that we want to watch going forward, but what are you watching in this week of college basketball or in the next 2 weeks to help you do what you do as far as a bracketologist?
Yeah, and we've kind of covered this, but I'm looking at leagues that might have a bid stealer, and I think I have my eye on a few. I'm not sold on Dayton. I'm not sold that they can win the A10 conference tournament. So that's a league. I have South Florida in the American. We've seen Memphis and Florida Atlantic struggle. Can South Florida take advantage of that, win the American conference tournament? And then others, Drake, possibility if Indiana State's an at-large bid, if Drake can sneak out of the Missouri Valley and take that conference, then that's a 2-bid league. And then really the Pac-12 is a league that I have a feeling someone's gonna get hot down the stretch and take that conference. So those are the kind of four bid stealing leagues that I have my eye on. And these next 2 weeks will either reinforce that claim or reject it. We'll see how the teams play.
Well, Delphi Bracketology is big fans of the VCU Rams, and they're up to 15 wins now, so maybe that's one of those bid thieves. I think that's a very good point to our listeners that right now you take the conference champions, however you do it one way, we do it another way for our bracket work, but ultimately the team that wins those conferences gets to go, and if it's not the favorite, then that really makes the back end of the bracket different from what people might predict, and that is happening in that last 2 or 3 days of the committee of that conference tournament week. I think that's really good. I'm looking for some teams to start solidifying in the middle. I like your 1-bid leagues. We always look at the bubble, but that seed line, 5 through 8, there's some teams that we talked Auburn and we talked Illinois. Who's going to take a step forward by winning several games in a row and kind of cementing their spot a little bit higher than someone else? You mentioned Texas Tech and TCU and Texas, the Big 12, lots of opportunities, and you could have those teams anywhere from 7 to 10 in the bracket. I really, as a bracketologist, want some clarity in those areas of the 6 and 7, 8 seed line. Probably will not get it, Gage, but that's kind of what I'm looking for, is who can separate themselves in that, top 20 to top 35, if you will, in our seed list. I think that's something. Obviously, we're going to look at the bubble. We're going to look at the top seeds. So, Gage, this has been great. I have really appreciated following your work. I think you do a good job of engaging with people on social media, and we encourage anyone who listens to this podcast to go follow your work and ask you questions. It's just fun getting to be around good bracketologists who really take their job seriously. So we thank you for joining us. And again, would you share again your Twitter handle before we get out of here?
Yeah, just at CBBT Bracketology. It stands for CBB Topic Bracketology. But yeah, great stuff going on. Pretty good engagement from my followers, and yeah, looking forward to winding down the season and having even more debates and conversations concerning college basketball.
Always a fun time. So that'll do it for this episode of the Bracket U. I'm Brian Tonsoni for Gage Businger. We thank you for listening. We hope your team gets a lot of quad 1 wins and maybe some quad 1 wins on the road. We'll be back on Thursday night with some of our students in a round table. We'll also be filming our ISC Sports Network television show tomorrow with some more bracket talk, so you can follow us there. Look for our work at DelphiBracketology.com and on Twitter at Delphi Brackets is the handle. We will try to answer any and all questions as we get closer to March Madness. Thank you for listening.